In this video, we will show you how to replace your throttle body assembly on this Ford Fusion with a 2-liter engine. This will be located along the front of your engine. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. A quick note, to be able to do this throttle body, you will have to remove the intake manifold. It's a good idea to have brand new intake manifold gaskets set. Under the hood, you're going to see your negative battery terminal right back here. We're going to loosen the 10mm nut, remove the terminal from the battery, a quick inspection, and set it aside. For this, it's easiest if you use a ratcheting 10mm wrench. We'll just put it right onto that 10mm nut in there. Next, we're going to reach in here, we'll lift this up and slide it aside. Just give that a quick inspection. If you see any funny colors, it's probably corrosion, and if that's the case, you want to take care of it. Let's move along from there. We're going to remove our upper engine cover. This is going to be very simple. Just go ahead and take hold of that and give it a light tug straight upward. A quick inspection of that shield and we'll set it aside. Now, looking along the top of the engine, I can see a whole bunch of miscellaneous debris. We want to confirm that nothing will fall inside of the engine and cause any internal engine damage, so I'm just going to use some compressed air and clean this area up. You could also use a vacuum cleaner if necessary. To be able to remove the throttle body, we're going to remove the intake manifold at the same time. Let's disconnect this line coming across the top of the engine. For this, you can see a locking tab right out in the open. It has a second one just located below it. Squeeze the two in and separate this. Quick inspection, set it aside. If you find you have a hard time squeezing it with your fingers, you could use some pliers. Just be extremely careful not to cause any damage. We're only pressing on the locks. There we are. Just set that aside. Now we're going to follow this wiring harness down. You can find 2 electrical connectors. We'll start with this one out towards the front. Just go ahead and squeeze in on that locking tab and pull that out of place. You can see the next one down in here. Let's take that harness and we'll set that aside as well. With that disconnected, if you were to look just below it, we have another wiring harness. For this one, we're going to dislodge it from the intake manifold. You can use a small prying device. I'm just going to use a trim tool here. We'll pop that out of the manifold. We'll just disconnect this, squeeze on the locking tab. Quick inspection on both ends. Now you're going to find that you have a line leading to this area of the intake. For this, it does have 2 gray tabs. You want to try to squeeze those in and pull this out of place. These can be a little bit difficult to get to. Just twist it as needed. We'll press one way, press the other. Pull that off of there. Let's make our way all the way across the intake now. Make our way down along the side. You're going to find another electrical connector that we have to disconnect. We'll just dislodge that from the manifold with our small trim tool or prying device. After that, we can disconnect it. Are. Let's squeeze on the locking tab. We'll dislodge this. Quick inspection both sides. Now in that same area, you can see this larger plastic area that slides into the intake. We're going to pry that out of the rubber grommet. Let's use a small pry bar for this. Let's move towards the center of the intake manifold. Now, if you were to follow the center of the manifold down, you're going to find the throttle body, and continuing down lower than the throttle body, we have the area where this hose connects to it. We only need to loosen the clamp that holds the hose to the throttle body. On my application, I can see it right down along the side of the intake here. To loosen this, I'm going to use a 7mm. Continuing from here, we're just going to lightly tap on this hose. I'm using an angled pick. We're trying to press it down and off of the throttle body. All right, now that we have that separated, we can start dislodging the manifold from the engine. To dismount the intake manifold from the engine, you're going to find 5 10mm headed mounting bolts. There's one on each side. One's tucked inside this corner behind the tensioner. As you make your way towards the center, you have one here, one down in this port, another one here, and one all the way on the far side there. Let's start with the one that's located behind the tensioner. Here we go. Have to break this free. We have one side corner out. Let's continue on over to the other side, and we'll continue making our way towards the center, with the center bolt being our final mounting bolt before we start pulling this away from the engine. Now we'll move to our final mounting bolt, but keep in mind there is still a wiring harness located along the backside, and there's also a tube that we'll have to disconnect as well. Take a look at that. We can start separating it. Now let's have a peek down along the backside. Now we can pull this straight forward, and we can gain access along the backside of the intake. We can see that line leading to it. This has two locking tabs, one right where my index finger is, the other one is located just below it. Squeeze the two in and slide this out of place. A quick inspection and set it aside. There we are. That looks good. As we continue lifting this up, we can see the throttle body along the bottom of the intake here. It does have a wiring harness. This wiring harness, to disconnect it, has a red locking tab. We just want to carefully start pulling that away from the electrical connector. It does not fully remove, typically. Once you have that dislodged, carefully reach in and under the center of this area and squeeze in on the next locking tab and disconnect the electrical connector from the throttle body. Just reach under here, squeeze on that tab, pull this out of place. You can see that locking tab that I squeezed in on. Quick inspection for corrosion. Now we can lift this up and out of position, and let's get it over to the bench. On the bench, I have the manifold raised up with a small spacer here. I'm going to start removing each of the 4 bolts that are holding the throttle body to that intake. We'll be using an 8mm for each of these. Let's get the last one off of there. We're holding onto the throttle body so it does not fall. We'll give that throttle body a quick wiggle and remove it from the intake manifold. There it is, friend. With the throttle body off of the intake, the next thing that you need to do is remove the gasket, clean the mounting area, and it's a good idea to have a brand new gasket. You can use a small pick or a small screwdriver. We'll essentially just pull this right on out of here. Continuing from here, we're going to clean up this mounting area and install our brand new gasket. Close inspection, make sure there's no miscellaneous debris or damage to the intake manifold. If you see any damage, you have to replace the manifold. Got our new gasket. Press that in. Double check, make sure that's secured in place. Now we have the 4 gaskets, which are where the intake manifold connects to the engine. You can remove each of these. You can use the same tool for these. Once again, we're going to clean up the mating surface. Use our rag. New gasket here. Slide that right in there. Repeat the process for all others. Now we can install the throttle body onto the manifold. We'll get this properly aligned here. Start in each of the mounting bolts. When you go to snug and torque these, you want to do it in a crisscross manner. Get our torque wrench. Let's just go around one more time just to confirm it's properly torqued. Now we can get this over to the vehicle. Back in the engine compartment, before we install the intake manifold with the throttle body, we want to pay attention to the mating surface of the engine where the intake manifold will rest against. As you can tell, there is some debris in this area. We just want to go ahead and give this a quick wipe. If you see anything stuck to it, you could try to scrape it. Whatever you do, make sure nothing goes inside of any of the ports leading into the engine. I'll just use some parts cleaner directly on a clean rag here and give this a wipe. Once again, I'm making sure nothing makes its way into the engine. Moving down from there, we also need to clean and inspect the hose that goes down along the bottom of the throttle body. We'll give it a quick wipe and then a quick squeeze, making sure it's still soft and pliable. That looks good. It's not dry rotted and cracked in any way or stiff. Let's continue on with the installation. Start bringing this down into position. Before we go too low, we need to install the electrical connector onto the throttle body and secure the wiring harness in this small hooked area. We have our connector. We'll just go ahead and press that in, listen for a click from it. Once you do hear a click, you also need to press in that red locking tab to lock it in. I heard a click from that. We're giving it a light tug to ensure it's properly on there. Now we're going to lock it in. Press that red locking tab all the way towards the connector on the throttle body itself. As we bring this down, we're going to align this wiring harness with its small hooked area here. We're also going to align the throttle body with its lower hose down there that we just finished cleaning. But we also have one last thing that we're going to align as well before we mount this up, and that's this tube along the back side of the intake here. Got an audible click from that, light tug. Let's get this aligned, start bringing it down. There we are. As we're pressing that manifold down, we have the throttle body making its way onto that hose that we just finished cleaning. Continuing from here, we can start in each of the mounting bolts. I'm going to start with the two upper ones that are out in the open. They're the easiest to get to. We are not going to snug any of the bolts before we start all of them in. Tightening and torquing these will be in a specific sequence. Still loose. Now it's time for the other three. For the center mounting bolt, we're going to get this down inside here. We'll get it aligned with our magnet, and we can go ahead and start it in with our socket as well. This corner one over here, still using that magnet, it just helps me guide it as needed. Let's get this last one started in as well. Now we're going to continue on to snugging and torquing these in a specific sequence as I mentioned, starting from the center, making our way out towards each end. Let's start snugging these. Once you have all of them snugged, torque them in the same sequence to 177 inch-pounds. Get our torque wrench. Once you have that torqued the first time around, repeat that same torquing sequence one more time. Now let's make our way along the front of the intake manifold. We have that clamp for the tube that leads to the bottom of the throttle body. We're going to tighten the clamp and make sure the hose is properly secured. I'm trying to push this down and out of place. Feels tight. Now we can move towards the driver's side of the intake here. We have a couple things to attach. Let's start with our electrical connector here on the driver's side of the intake. Press the two pieces together, listen for a click from those, make sure they're secured. Continuing from here, we need to secure this to the ear of the intake. We just want to press that in along the back side there. Double check, make sure that's secured in place. Now let's get this plastic mount directly into this rubber grommet. Just press that in. Let's make our way over towards the passenger side of the intake manifold now. We'll start reconnecting our wiring harnesses. We'll start with this one that's supposed to be mounted along the back side of the intake ear, right along here. Once we have that pressed in and we hear a click, we can mount it to the back side of the intake. Our clip was broken, so I'll just be using a wire tie, ensuring that it's properly secured. Just trim that off of there, make sure that's secure. Now that we have the wiring harness secured, let's move just below it. You can see this area on the intake manifold for our line to connect onto. We'll just press that on, listen for a click, make sure it's locked in. Now that I have it pressed on, I'm going to give it a light tug, trying to remove it from the intake. It should not slide off. Let's get this wiring harness down here. We have two more connectors. This one goes right underneath this ear of the intake. I heard a click, a light tug. Moving along, we have our map sensor. Now we can follow this up along the top here. We have another line that goes onto the air intake system. We're just going to take this and we'll press it right on. One last quick inspection in this area and we can continue on to our engine cover. Looking at the engine cover, you're going to find 4 grommets for those tabs to slide into. We'll align it and press this down into position. A light tug to make sure it's secured in place. Let's reattach the negative battery terminal. We'll push this all the way down onto the battery terminal end there and then tighten our 10mm mounting nut. Take hold of the terminal end, give it a wiggle, make sure it's properly secured. Okay friend, we finished the installation of our throttle body assembly. At this point, hop in the vehicle, start it up, let it run, make sure you have no check engine light, no running condition, and take your vehicle for a road test. If you find that you do have a check engine light or a running condition, you may have to do a relearn procedure for the throttle body assembly. That's typically done with a scan tool. Aside from that, thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.